Hello and welcome to Grey Sheep and Hedge Wizards, my Song of Ice and Fire show, where I talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. And today's topic is going to be House Martell, or you might call it Dorne's Letter Part 4. So you'll probably want to watch parts 1 through 3 first. And the spoiler scope for this show is spoilers everything published in the A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. R. Martin. If you're new to the show, I'm Apples and Dragons, and the candle is lit because it represents the return of magic to the world, which is what it represents in this story. So let me grab the books and I'll get started. Rattler's holding down the roll. I'm going to need a lot of books today. World. Storm. Feast. And dance. Ugh. Oh boy. Look like a kid in a candy store. Okay. So last time, the last 3 times, I dove into the Dorne's Letter mystery that is first presented in the World of Ice and Fire, and second in Fire and Blood. Crap! Let me get Fire and Blood. Hiya! And it's a really cool mystery. To summarize it quickly, we discovered that during the First Dornish War, Aegon the Conqueror accidentally gave House Martell and Dorne Dragonglass when he burned the Hellholt in the surrounding sands. And then, after Dorne killed Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes, Dorne used the dragon's corpse to test various materials on Meraxes' body. And one of the materials they tested was the Dragonglass, and learned why it's called Dragonglass, because it can pierce dragon scales. And the question of whether or not Dragonglass can pierce dragon scales has not been answered in the story or demonstrated. So far it's based purely on a matching description, where dragon scales are described as harder than steel, and Dragonglass is described by Jon as sharper than steel. And then there's a passage from Stannis that tells us that there's dragonglass in the caves under Dragonstone. And so that's the answer to the mystery of why Aegon, after he read the letter from Prince Nymor, flew to Dragonstone, because he had to test the dragonglass for himself on Balerion to see if Nymor was telling the truth. And that's why he went at night, so that nobody would see what he's doing. And then I went through a bunch of other parts of the story to show how that interpretation fleshes out in the rest of the story. For example, it adds a lot of meaning to the situation with Sarella Sand at the Citadel, or Alleras the Sphinx, as she's currently known. So in this episode, I want to go through more parts of this story to show you how our discovery that Dragonglass kills dragons and that the Martells have Dragonglass helps us to explain more parts of this story. But first I'm going to flesh out the Dorne's Letter mystery a little bit more, because I learned some new things about that I want to share. And there's one correction I need to make to something I said in a previous episode. So first up is the correction. In a previous episode I said that the Grand Maester role was created by the Targaryen dynasty much later. The Grand Maester role of the Citadel of Oldtown didn't exist prior to the Targaryen dynasty, and that the Targaryen dynasty created it in order to hire and position their own propagandists above the other maesters. I think Archmaester is the next step beneath Grand Maester. The correction I need to make is that it wasn't created much later. It was created by Aegon the Conqueror in 5 AC. So it didn't take long for House Targaryen to recognize that they're going to need their own version of the story of history. And on that note, that brings me to the next topic I wanted to talk about, the storyness of the story of these versions of history. The Dorne's letter mystery is shaped in such a way that it causes readers outside of the story and characters in the story alike to funnel towards the conclusion that the persuasiveness in the letter had something to do with Rhaenys' death. And the premier way that it achieves that is that for most of the story, it's telling you what happened. But for two parts of it, it's telling you a bunch of possibilities for what might have happened. And those two parts are Rhaenys' death and the contents of the letter. So we make the connection that, well, these two moments are so ambiguated that ambiguation seems to connect them. And so that's what we do in our heads. And some of the possibilities provided by the historians nudge us along towards that connection. Whether Rhaenys Targaryen outlived her dragon remains a matter of dispute. Some say that she lost her seat and fell to her death. Others that she was crushed beneath Meraxes in the castle yard. A few accounts claim the queen survived her dragon's fall, only to die a slow death by torment in the dungeons of the Ullrs. The true circumstances of her demise will likely never be known, but Rhaenys Targaryen, sister and wife to King Aegon I, perished at the Hellholt in Dorne in the 10th year after the conquest. So those are the possibilities for Rhaenys' death, provided by the historian. And it's our job to make sense of them, to figure out what really happened. And so, one of, if not the most popular theory or category of theories for these mysteries is that the letter said something like, we have Rhaenys and we're torturing her, and we'll end her torture if you give us peace. We'll put her out of her misery. Hellholt is the castle of House Ullr, and so the dungeons of the Ullrs is the dungeon in Hellholt. And Hellholt is where Meraxes was slain. And so when the Ullrs or the Dornish people or House Martell, or any combination, decided that they were going to do weapon experiments on Meraxes' body, they probably took her to the dungeons of the Ullrs to do those experiments. And every Targaryen in the story can be and often is referenced as a dragon. Symbolically, of course, or figuratively. But dragon nevertheless. So it's kind of funny that this possibility of Rhaenys being tortured in the dungeons of the Ullrs was probably actually what happened to the dragon. I mean, the literal dragon. The dragon was already dead, so it wouldn't have been much of a torture from the dragon's perspective. But dragging the dragon's body down to the dungeons and doing weapon tests on it, where you're firing bows and crossbows and scorpions and hitting it with daggers and swords and everything to see what works, could fairly be described as a sort of torture. Because by the time they're done with the tests, the dragon's body is going to look like a pincushion. So in a funny way, by providing this possibility of Rhaenys being tortured in the dungeon of the Ullrs, the historian provided us, in a coded sort of way, the truth. And the more that I think about and flesh out the details of this Dorne's letter mystery, the more I can see that the whole body of text of the Dorne's letter mystery takes on this quality, where the historian makes very subtle suggestions by placing two seemingly unrelated things beside each other. Because the human brain has a tendency to imagine associations between two things that are placed beside each other. For example, Maester Gyldayn, the author of Fire and Blood, cites two Grand Maesters who made contributions to this part of history. Those are Grand Maester Clegg and Grand Maester Lucan. Grand Maester Lucan wrote a list of reasons why King Aegon was on the point of refusing the Dornish proposals of peace and continuing the war. And Clegg provides a possibility for the contents of the letter. That Prince Nymor threatened to engage the faceless men of Braavos to kill King Aegon's son and heir, Queen Rhaenys' boy Rhaenys, then but 6 years old. And the contributions of these two maesters sandwich the Dorne's letter mystery. Maester Gyldayn wrote these histories so that the letter is delivered right between the contributions of these two maesters, Grand Maesters. Almost as if to say, here's some more information you're going to need to solve this letter mystery. You're going to need to know what the Targaryen propagandists are saying about the situation, if you want a better chance of working out what was in the letter. And not because the possibilities that those Targaryen propagandists are providing are true, but because of the quality of their falseness. Grand Maester Lucan's contributions cover up the possibility that Aegon was the primary force behind continuing the war. And Clegg's contribution covers up that Dorne was actually in the dominant position regarding this letter, by saying, driven by desperation, Prince Nymor might have threatened blah blah blah. And it continues the theme of Dorne bad, by depicting Dorne as cheaters, because engaging assassins is sort of a dishonorable way to win. And killing a 6-year-old boy is also dishonorable and evil. It's an indirect sort of way to win, targeting his heir instead of Aegon himself. There was a part I just saw that I actually wanted to comment on, about horses. Let me find that again. Page 37. Age and ill health finally did what dragons and armies could not. In 13 AC, Miriam Martell, the Yellow Toad of Dorne, died abed, whilst having intimate relations with a stallion, her enemies insisted. The part about the stallion, it's seated in Daeron the Young Dragon's story, where Daeron the Young Dragon tried to conquer Dorne, and he wrote a book about it as he was doing it. And the suggestion is that he's kind of simple-minded. He's not a very good writer. But during his conquest, he noticed and thought it was strange that the Dornish revere their horses so highly, almost as if they're children. Dorne is famous for their sand steeds, and their sand steeds are famous for their beauty and their ability to go a long time without water, or with little water. They're desert horses, and they're small, but some of them keep their horses stabled in their castle. And so Dorne, being a horse-loving nation, the intimate relations with the stallion thing was a natural go-to, I guess, if you're a Targaryen or a Targaryen loyalist Westerosi, and you're trying to tarnish the reputation of your enemy, the leader of Dorne and House Martell, Miria. There's another Maester I didn't talk about. His name is Maester Timotty. Here he is. The World of Ice and Fire, page 247. Grief-stricken at the death of their beloved sister, King Aegon and Queen Visenya set ablaze every castle, keep, and hold fast in Dorne, at least once, save for Sunspear and the Shadow City. Why this is so remains a matter of conjecture. In Dorne, it was said the Targaryens feared that Princess Miria had some cunning means of slaying dragons, something she had purchased from Lyce. Likelier, however, is Archmaester Timotty's suggestion in his Conjectures that the Targaryens hoped to turn the rest of the Dornish, who suffered so much destruction, against the Martells, who were spared. If this is true, it may explain the letters dispatched from the marches to the Dornish houses, urging them to surrender, and claiming that the Martells had betrayed them by buying their safety from the Targaryens at the expense of the rest of Dorne. So apparently there were letters dispatched from the marches to the Dornish houses, urging them to surrender, and claiming that the Martells had betrayed them by buying their safety from the Targaryens at the expense of the rest of Dorne. And it's a possibility that is never mentioned anywhere else, so there's really no way to confirm or disconfirm it. And so I think I have to assume for now that it's true. And I thought it was strange that Timothy's contributions appear to be true, while the contributions of the other Maesters, Clegg and Lucan, are so obviously false. That is, until I considered that Lucan and Clegg are Grandmaesters, and Timotty's an Archmaester. So I think Timotty's contributions are here to show us, hey, the Archmaesters are a bit more reliable than the Grandmaesters, because they're not propagandists. They work for the Citadel, not the Targaryens. Some cunning means of slaying dragons, something she had purchased from Lys, is another thing that might show me that Dorne and just the common people in general, or at least in the common rumor mill, there was some nascent awareness that House Martell had discovered some way of killing dragons. They just didn't know the details. But Lys is a specific place, and so it's kind of strange that the reference to Lys is there. Like, how do you come up with Lys? Even if I've heard that House Martell has a secret way of killing dragons, but I don't know anything more about it than that, how do I get Lys from that? And I think the answer is provided throughout the rest of the series, in places where Lys is mentioned. So let me read one of those, and I'll show you what I mean. A Feast for Crows, page 300. This is the Queenmaker chapter, with Arianne. Garen says, and the Golden Company broke its contract with Myr, just as the Myr men were about to go to war with Lys. The Lyseni bought them off, suggested Silva. Clever Lyseni, Dre said. Clever, craven Lyseni. Arianne knew better. If Quentin has the Golden Company behind him. Lys has a reputation for being clever and crafty, craven and tricky. Trickiness and cravenness kind of go hand in hand in this world because it's so strength-based. Strength is so important in this very martial kind of world, the Ice and Fire world. So cowardice has much bigger costs in their world than it does in ours. Or maybe not. Maybe just a more direct cost. More commonly paid in life than in opportunities or money or whatever. But yeah, apparently Lys has a reputation for being clever and crafty and in kind of a cowardly sort of way. So if you're a common person and you're trying to imagine what it might be that Miriam Martell has that can kill dragons, some crafty, tricky contraption from Lys is a natural go-to. So I think that's what Lys basically translates to in that passage. Just some tricky, crafty thing. And with that definition, they're mostly right. Because Dragonglass is a tricky, crafty thing. It's a rare material, it's hard to get, and pretty much nobody knows yet that it kills dragons. Except the Martells. And the Targaryens, actually. That was another thing I wanted to talk about. I called the Dragonglass Secret a Martell secret, but really I should call it a Martell-Targaryen secret, because since Prince Nymor revealed the secret in that letter, Aegon the Conqueror knows the secret. So the most reasonable assumption is that Aegon would pass that secret down to his descendants, tell them to pass it down for as long as they possibly can, to keep the knowledge alive. Hey, Dorne has this thing that kills dragons. Leave Dorne alone. And so that's a thread that needs to be followed all the way through the Targaryen line to the present day. Because apparently, to judge by the actions of Daeron the Young Dragon and maybe even Aegon IV the Unworthy, that secret did get lost in the Targaryen family. But of course, by the time that they were kings, the secret wouldn't have mattered as much, because the dragons were already dead. But the secret would have still mattered a little bit, because you never know when dragons might come back. Or rather, when a dragon egg might hatch. Especially when there are prophecies floating around that dragons are going to return someday. Anyway, those were some of the loose ends I wanted to talk about with his Dorne's Letter mystery. Now I want to pull back a little bit and talk about some of the broader implications of the Dragonglass discovery, and say some things about its symbolic role in the story. as the material that kills dragons. Since I know from Stannis that there's dragonglass in the tunnels under Dragonstone, that might inform the in-world or at least creative decision by George R. R. Martin to name Dragonstone Dragonstone. It's the place where the stone that can kill dragons is found, and naturally occurs. It occurs within volcanoes, naturally. And it's a really cool creative decision on the part of the author, because dragonglass it's a stone that can kill dragons, but dragons are tyrannical creatures, and they're the creatures of the tyrant family, and they're part of the story's seduction into tyranny. And all of those things have tyrants in common. So I could also say that dragonglass is the thing that kills tyranny as such. Which is terrible, because while dragonglass is sharper than steel, it's also very brittle. It's described as brittle by Jon, in the same passage where it's described as sharper than steel. So that means dragonglass is consumed when it's used. A brittle material, you can't shoot it from an arrow or a crossbow bolt, or a scorpion bolt, without shattering it into a bunch of little pieces. So dragonglass being brittle means that it's only good for one use. And dragonglass being only good for one use means that it's consumable, which means that it's finite. It's going to run out eventually. And so it creates this really cool, true-to-life relationship between the availability of dragonglass and the exertion of tyranny, where the ability to fight the tyranny is proportionate to how much tyranny has been exerted and how recently. And it's also cool that dragonglass killing the tyrant, or tyranny as such, is tied up with this element of memory, where Dorne's power with the dragonglass is not just that they have dragonglass, it's that they have dragonglass combined with, they have the knowledge, or have rediscovered the memory, that dragonglass can kill dragons, and that's why it's called dragonglass. So dragonglass being tied up with memory like this, it represents the memory of the tyranny. It represents, hey, don't forget how bad things can get. It represents the idea that people who enjoy long periods of peace forget what tyranny is like, and so they forget how to fight it. And they become lax in their principles and their values, and they become weak at resisting and fighting against tyranny. Weak and stupid. Which is exactly what happened to Dorne. They had to suffer so much destruction and death before they managed to kill a dragon, a Targaryen, and test weapons on the dragon. And then Aegon giving them the dragonglass was just a stroke of luck. Because he got so mad about the death of his sister wife and her dragon. I also like that tyranny is not the only source of dragonglass, that it actually occurs naturally in nature, because that also reflects life. People can be tyrannized by other people, but they can also be tyrannized by nature. And a volcano and its lava and all of that being an element of nature, something that nobody has any control over, allows a volcano to represent nature as such. And so another way of getting the thing that can kill the tyranny is to have been subjected to tyranny from nature. So it's cool that there's this alternative way of getting the thing that can kill the tyranny. You don't have to suffer from a tyrant. You just probably do. But there's this other option of just exposing yourself to nature more and not letting yourself become too far removed from nature that it makes you weak and stupid. It's to go into the volcano and face the lava and the heat and the darkness and pull out the dragonglass, the thing that can kill the tyranny. Another name for dragonglass is frozen fire. And this is told to us in A Storm of Swords, Samwell 5, page 885. Stannis says to Samwell, "You slew this creature with an obsidian dagger, I am told," he said to Sam. Yes, your grace. Jon Snow gave it to me." Dragonglass, the Red Woman's laugh was music. Frozen fire in the tongue of old Valyria. Small wonder it is anathema to these cold children of the other. "On Dragonstone, where I had my seat," There is much of this obsidian to be seen in the old tunnels beneath the mountain, the king told Sam. Chunks of it, boulders, ledges. The great part of it was black, as I recall, but there was some green as well, some red, even purple. So that's the passage that tells us that there's dragonglass in the tunnels of Dragonstone. But it also tells us that frozen fire is another name for dragonglass, and that the name frozen fire comes from the east. It's a Valyrian word. We don't get to see the Valyrian word, but Melisandre translates it for us to frozen fire. And so it turns out that obsidian was not the only word that was misdirecting us, the readers, from noticing that dragonglass might be named dragonglass because it can kill dragons. Frozen fire is Valyria's version of obsidian. Calling dragonglass frozen fire glorifies the dragonglass as a product of dragonfire, a product of the tyrant creature. So it draws attention to the fact that this stone is created by dragons, and it has the effect of drawing attention away from this stone can kill dragons. And that's another cool feature of the symbolism of it. By exerting tyranny, the tyrant creates the seeds of his own destruction. So the frozen fire name was doing a lot of work on us, the readers, to misdirect us in the same way. Where a tendency to fall in love with the tyrant and cheer for them instead of the people who are fighting against them is the reason that we took to the frozen fire name so strongly. And then, having taken to it so strongly, we're distracted from the meaning of the word dragonglass. That dragonglass can kill dragons. Which is a fact any dragon owner would reasonably want to distract people from. But I still don't know why the dragonglass is different colors. There's green, red, purple, and black. But this is naturally occurring dragonglass. These weren't created by dragons, because they're in the tunnels of Dragonstone. So it's mostly safe to assume that they were created by lava, the heat of the lava. So I guess at minimum, maybe a good starting point for figuring out why there's different colored dragonglass is just to note that between the two sources of the thing that can kill tyranny, nature produces a greater diversity of it. So that's enough about symbolism. Let's talk about Sarella Sand, or Alleras the Sphinx. Her Sphinx nickname is a totally different topic that I'll probably talk about some other time when we talk about Sphinxes. Let's focus on Sarella Sand, the person, and what she's doing, and what her role appears to be in this story. Last time I read the passage from the prologue of A Feast for Crows at the Quill and Tankard in Old Town, where a bunch of Citadel students, one of them being Alleras the Sphinx, are just kind of hanging out in the late evening and talking about dragons. And in it, we learned that Alleras has recently acquired her copper link for Maester's chain, and copper represents the study of history. And during the conversation with dragons, just after dragonglass is mentioned, Alleras begins to respond to it and she trails off. Apparently she was about to say something about dragonglass, but stopped herself. And that now that we know that dragonglass can kill dragons, a reasonable conclusion for what she was going to say was that we're going to need that dragonglass in order to kill them. And Sarella is mentioned in a few other places throughout the story, and as a sand snake, she's pretty unique. So let me read some of those and show you what I mean. A Feast for Crows, the Captain of Guards, page 45. What is your command? You will find my brother's daughters, take them into custody, and confine them in the cells atop the spear tower. The sand snakes? The captain's throat was dry. All 8, my prince? The little ones also? The prince considered. Elaria's girls are too young to be a danger, but there are those who might seek to use them against me. It would be best to keep them safe in hand. Yes, the little ones as well. But first, secure Tyene, Nymeria, and Obara. As my prince commands. His heart was troubled. My little princess will mislike this. What of Sarella? She is a woman grown, almost 20. Unless she returns to Dorne, there's naught I can do about Sarella, save pray that she shows more sense than her sisters. Leave her to her game. Gather up the others. I shall not sleep until I know that they are safe and under guard. It will be done, the captain hesitated. When this is known in the streets, the common folk will howl. So there's Oberyn having his captain of guard, Zaryo Hota, round up the Sand Snakes, all except Sarella. So immediately upon Sarella's introduction, she's an outlier from the other Sand Snakes. Apparently, Oberyn doesn't think her troublesome enough to warrant being rounded up and confined. And his comments are predicated on Sarella being up to some sort of game. He seems more hopeful about Sarella, that Sarella is going to show more sense than her sisters. And that seems like a reasonable assumption on Doran's part, because she's at the Citadel. She's studying, trying to better herself, which is very different from what the other Sand Snakes are doing. So Sarella's up to some sort of game, and she's not a danger to Doran's plans. That's pretty much what we got from that. Now let's turn to page 298, A Feast for Crows, the Queenmaker. Arianne and the gang are at a place called Shandystone, where they're meeting up for Arianne's mission to crown and queen Princess Marcella in order to start a war with the Lannisters. It is lovely here, Dre observed as he was helping Garen water the horses. They had carried their own water with them. The sand steeds of Dorne were swift and tireless, and would keep going for long leagues after other horses had given out. But even such as they could not run dry. How did you know of this place? My uncle brought me here, with Tyene and Sarella. The memory made Arianne smile. He caught some vipers and showed Tyene the safest way to milk them for their venom. Sarella turned over rocks, brushed sand off the mosaics, and wanted to know everything there was to know about the people who had lived here. And that passage shows me that Sarella is, she's more academic than her sisters, and she's more interested in history. She wants to know about the people who lived there, about the mosaics, and she's turning over rocks. And turning over rocks is pretty funny, considering that apparently, based on her comments in the prologue, she learned like we did that there's a rock that can kill dragons, and House Martell has it. It's a Martell military secret. Now turn to page 591, A Feast for Crows 40, The Princess in the Tower. It was no good dwelling endlessly on Sir Eris, she knew. Instead, she made herself think about the Sand Snakes, Tyene especially. Arianne loved all her bastard cousins, from prickly, hot-tempered Obara to little Loreza, the youngest, only 6 years old. Tyene had always been the one she loved the most, though, the sweet sister that she never had. The princess had never been close to her brothers. Quentin was off at Ironwood, and Trystane was too young. No, it had always been her and Tyene, with Garen and Dre and Spotted Silva. Nym would sometimes join them in their sport, and Sarella was forever pushing in where she didn't belong. But for the most part, they had been a company of 5. Sarella was forever pushing in where she didn't belong. And that's exactly what she's doing in the Citadel in Old Town. A girl disguised as a boy studying history. Because girls are not allowed to study in the Citadel. So that's what she has to do. Sarella Sand is a cool character. Dragonglass being tied up with memory is pretty interesting in consideration of the history of the Hill of Rhaenys. The Hill of Rhaenys is a hill in King's Landing that originally held the Sept of Remembrance, a house of worship for the faith of the Seven. And it seems noteworthy that the Sept of Remembrance was eventually destroyed by a Targaryen dragon rider's dragon, Maegor riding Balerion, and then replaced with the Dragon Pit, a building that houses and protects dragons. It's a feature of the story that indicates to me that Maegor probably knew the secret that Aegon the Conqueror did, because Aegon probably passed it down to his sons. The secret that Dragonglass can kill dragons and that the Martells have Dragonglass. The Martells are known for poisons and assassinations and whatnot. And so, if you're a Targaryen king during the days when the dragons are alive, you're going to want to protect those dragons from assassinations. And so it probably had a lot to do with why the Dragon Pit was constructed. House Targaryen needed a place to house their dragons where they would be safe from assassinations by House Martell. And all they had to do was destroy the faith of the Seven Sept of Remembrance, which is very much aligned with the Targaryen interest of destroying the memory of Dragonglass and the knowledge that Dragonglass can kill dragons. And it all took place on top of Rhaenys' hill, Rhaenys being the woman who died with the dragon, upon which the testing was possible that allowed the House Martell to discover that Dragonglass kill dragons. And remember, basically. Remember what kills the tyranny. House Martell is Westeros' memory of what kills the tyranny. Throughout the series, there are scattered a bunch of little references to people trading or acquiring Dragonglass in small amounts. There are some mentions that the wildlings have some. It's written that the children of the forest were very proficient with Dragonglass. And the captain of the ship Cobblecat, a ship that Davos remembers traveling on, traded with the wildlings, and one of the things that they traded or received in the trade was Dragonglass. And then the ship was caught smuggling by Eastwatch, and the captain was beheaded in front of Davos. And this remains to be seen, but presumably the cargo, including the Dragonglass, was acquired by Eastwatch of the Night's Watch. So maybe the Night's Watch have Dragonglass too, even before Jon found the bag of Dragonglass that he found. At the end of Part 3, I said that the Dragonglass discovery is probably going to help us understand some things about Dorne Martell, because Martell's Dragonglass Secret might have something to do with Martell's plotting and political maneuvering and all that. And having given it some thought, I think I know what it is. So that's the main thing I wanted to share in this episode. In order to research it, I reread all of the Dorne plotline in Feast and Dance. So those were the Arya Hota chapters, the Arianne chapters, some of the Daenerys chapters, the Quentyn chapters, and Eris Oakheart. And by the end of it all, Dorne Martell finally levels with Arianne and tells her, sort of brings her in on his plotting. And then also brings in some of the other Sand Snakes. Hesitantly, but he does bring them in. And he gives them roles to play. And Dorne Martell reveals to Arianne that when House Targaryen fell, a pact was made between House Martell and House Targaryen with the Sea Lord of Braavos as witness, I think it was. And the pact was that Viserys Targaryen is going to marry Arianne Martell. And it's a reasonable political maneuver, because if Viserys ever did succeed in retaking Westeros for House Targaryen, away from House Baratheon and Lannister, that would make Arianne Martell queen, which would make House Martell queen. And from that point on, in the Targaryen lineage tree, House Martell would have a blood claim to the throne. But of course, even the best laid plans can fall to ruin, And when Viserys was killed by Khal Drogo, the pact had to change. And so Doran Martell sent Quentyn, thinking that he would uphold the pact by having Quentyn marry Daenerys. And so the adjustment retains the marriage of the same two families. It just switches up the sexes. So now this time it won't be Viserys king and Arianne queen of the Seven Kingdoms. It'll be Quentyn king and Daenerys queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Which is a little more of a problematic deal. Just because Westeros doesn't do inheritance the way Dorne does. For Westeros, you have to be male in order to be the king, the ruler. And with Quentyn's marriage to Daenerys, almost certainly Daenerys having dragons is going to leverage them to make herself the principal ruler in the marriage. Where, at least for the duration of her reign, the man's not going to rule over the woman. The woman's going to rule over the man. The queen is going to be the principal ruler in the marriage. But it could still work, and it's a reasonable political maneuver as it is on the part of Doran Martell. But of course, Daenerys turns him down and marries his daughter instead. Then Quentyn gets burned by the dragons and apparently killed. Some people theorize that maybe he's not dead yet. Maybe there's some identity switcheroo going on. There might be, I don't know. I couldn't suss out any trickery in that regard, despite trying. So as it stands now, I think Quentyn is actually dead. And going to stay dead. And that there was no switcheroo. But there's a really curious line that always kind of made me scratch my head in the past. That comes from the thoughts of Quentyn. So let me find that and read it. Because I think you're going to like it. It's in A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 6, The Merchant's Man, page 91. Quentyn is sort of reminiscing about his old flames, his first kiss and all that. And he's worried about what Daenerys is going to think of him. More recently, the youngest of Lord Ironwood's daughters had taken to following him about the castle. Gwyneth was but 12, a small scrawny girl whose dark eyes and brown hair set her apart in that house of blue-eyed blondes. She was clever, though, as quick with words as with her hands, and fond of telling Quentyn that he had to wait for her to flower so she could marry him. That was before Prince Doran had summoned him to the Water Gardens, and now the most beautiful woman in the world was waiting in Meereen, and he meant to do his duty and claim her for his bride. She will not refuse me. She will honor the agreement. Daenerys Targaryen would need Dorne to win the Seven Kingdoms, and that meant that she would need him. It does not mean that she will love me, though. She may not even like me. So Quentyn's kind of worried that Dany's not going to like him, and he's kind of intimidated because her reputation is that she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And Quentyn thinks to himself, Daenerys Targaryen would need Dorne to win the Seven Kingdoms. So maybe you can tell me, why does Quentyn think Daenerys Targaryen would need Dorne to win the Seven Kingdoms? Well, he's a Martell. Of course he's got a Martell bias. House Martell is just that cool. It makes sense that Quentyn Martell would have a pride in House Martell. But it doesn't make sense in the way that Dany has just as many dragons as Aegon the Conqueror, and Aegon the Conqueror didn't need Dorne to win the Seven Kingdoms. He won 6 kingdoms without Dorne, and then House Targaryen acquired Dorne later, through marriage. So it would kind of make more sense if Quentyn had thought Daenerys Targaryen would need Dorne to win Dorne. But on its face, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that Quentyn thinks Daenerys would need Dorne to win the Seven Kingdoms. History proves that it makes perfect sense that she doesn't need Dorne to win 6 of those 7 kingdoms. Now that we know that Dragonglass kills dragons and that Martells have Dragonglass and are holding on to the secret that this can kill dragons, After the dragons died and the Targaryens were overthrown, House Martell became the gatekeepers of Westeros. House Martell knows that if any Targaryen with dragons wants to take back the Seven Kingdoms, they will not be able to do it without House Martell's permission, because they have the secret of the Dragonglass and the Dragonglass. And all they have to do to prevent another Targaryen conquest of Westeros is to share the secret and the stone. So House Martell was leveraging that knowledge to position themselves as queen first, queen of Westeros. That was going to be Arianne. And then after that plan fell through, now they're positioning for king of Westeros through Quentyn. So it kind of recontextualizes Dany's rejection of Quentyn a bit, doesn't it? She really should have married Quentyn, because now when she comes to conquer the Seven Kingdoms, those dragons are going down. They're going down hard, because House Martell's not going to allow it. Especially now that Doran's son has been killed at the hands of Dany's dragon. And now with Tywin dead, I think Doran's fixation on revenge is going to be lifted from Tywin and the Lannisters, as he himself says, and redirected towards Daenerys. Somewhat unrightfully, because Daenerys didn't actually kill Quentyn. It was her dragon. But somewhat rightfully, because Daenerys did reject Quentyn. And worse, she rejected Quentyn when she still had an opportunity to accept the marriage, because she hadn't married Hizdahr yet. She still could have bailed on Meereen. And Quentyn's timing makes this like maximally dramatic. Because Quentyn, his whole story is that he's on this long journey on behalf of his father and House Martell, and to make them proud, to offer his hand to Daenerys and complete this pact. And he goes through all these trials and tribulations, and his friends die along the way. And against all odds, he shows up on time, before Daenerys marries, in order to show her the letter and offer himself and complete the pact. And she rejects him. And then there's another period of time leading up to her marriage to Hizdahr, where Quentyn hasn't given up. He keeps coming back and re-offering himself and trying to persuade her. And she continues rejecting him all the way up to the day of the wedding, where he makes his last approach. And unknowingly, Daenerys rejects a marriage that she absolutely would have needed in order to conquer Westeros with dragons. She could still conquer Westeros with armies, but it's going to be a lot more difficult now. Anyway, guys, that's going to be pretty much all for this episode. I hope you got something out of it, had a good time. Listen to me ramble about A Song of Ice and Fire and Dragons. And hey, we even touched on the A Feast for Crows prologue a little bit. The chapter that inspired my brand, my name. Apples and Dragons. Thank you for coming, guys. Thank you for watching. And I'll see you next time.